So if you want to find 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9 will be my text for this morning. I do want to talk to us a little bit. I'm going to talk to us about giving, and really I'm going to talk about, it is my opinion that as Southern Baptists, really one of the greatest things that we do. I mean, there are a lot of denominations that believe in the gospel. There are a lot of denominations that believe in missions. But as Southern Baptists, to me, one of the greatest things that we do is the way that we support and send out missionaries all over the world. And one of those ways is through our International Mission Board. All Southern Baptist churches in America during December collect what we call the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. And all of that offering, everything that goes to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, none of it stays in our church, none of it pays a light bill, none of it pays a salary. It all goes completely and totally, and it doesn't even pay light bills at the IMB. It goes completely and totally to missionaries on the foreign mission field. And you see, the thing about the way that we send foreign missions, the way that we send missionaries into foreign places in our denomination is, that we support them so that, they don't have to worry about coming back to the States every 2 or 3 years and trying to raise support for another 2 or 3 years. They know they're going to get an income that's going to provide for them so that they can just completely and totally focus on that work that they're doing in the place and among the people that God has called them to. And so it's very, very important. And it's my understanding that the International Mission Board gets I'm going to say it's almost 90% of what it needs to support missionaries just in this 1 month, just through this one offering every year. So this Lottie Moon Christmas offering is very important. And I am going to be talking to you about that really specifically, but really I'm going to be talking to you about giving and getting a little bit ahead of myself. But just some facts about Miss Lottie Moon, who was a missionary in China, who this offering is named after. She was born in 1840, so you'll know that she lived through the Civil War. She lived during that time period. She was born in 1840. She was saved in 1858, so she was 18 years old. Wasn't like she was a little girl that grew up, loving the Lord all her life. She was saved at the age of 18. She was apparently kind of rebellious. She did grow up a privileged young woman for that day and time, which means her parents had stuff, and she was somewhat rebellious until she came to know the Lord. In 1873 is when she set sail for China. She was 33 years old. She died in 1912. She died on a boat off the coast of Japan. So she did not die back in the States. She was basically on her way back, but had basically already fallen so ill that she did not make it. She died. She had some sort of big sore on her, and they called it something, and I should have looked it up, but I don't even know what it was. But ultimately what they say she died of was malnutrition. It was a great famine in China at the time, and she was giving all of her food away to the Chinese people. And so what really ended up getting her was that she completely died of malnutrition. So I want you to know that there is a great need. 39 years she served there in China. I want you to know that there is a great need to support foreign missions, to support people who actually feel called. I know that everyone doesn't feel called to leave their nation and their culture and to go to other places. But you know what? Some people do. And we cannot discount that in their life. We cannot discount that call of God upon their life. And in fact, we need to support it. Did you know, and I read this stat, this has been several, many, somewhere in between there. Somewhere in between several and many. More than several, but less than many. Quite a few years ago, I read this stat. There is one in the U.S., there is one full-time paid ministerial staff person for every 1,000 people in the United States. One full-time paid ministerial staff person for every 1,000 people. Outside of the United States, there is one missionary for about every 2 million people. I'm telling you, the need is great. In fact, the most people in this world do not live in the United States. They live in this area called the 1040 window, and you can go home and look it up. But the majority of the people live in this area. It runs through Asia and in through there in the Middle East. It's a 1040 window. Most of the people in the world live in that little section of the world, and about 95% of them, not 95, about 90% of them do not know the Lord, and almost all of the unreached people live in this group. What we do here in America is what we preachers call preaching to the choir, all right? Not to say that there's not lost people here, because there are, but have had many opportunities to respond to the gospel in their lives. And that's not to say, I mean, we're also called here. So what I really want to talk to you, well, one of the things, I'm reading this book. I'm actually reading, it's called Send the Light. And it's actually writings of Miss Lottie Moon. A lot of it was her letters back to the mission board. Some of it was articles that she wrote for the women's journal, mission journal, that was going on at the time. When I read it, some of the things that jump out at me is just because she was single. In fact, she turned down a marriage proposal in order to go and be a missionary in China, to go and serve the Lord. She had to be lonely. She talks a lot in her letters about the hardship. She talks a lot in her letters about the overwhelming magnitude of the work of the people around them. She went to China at a time when there just weren't a lot of Westerners that went to places like that. She was called a devil woman for many years until she could live among the people and win them over. And even today, our missionaries, I mean, just think about it. You're going to gather around in Grandma's house probably over the next couple weeks, and the whole family's going to be there, and the cousins are going to be there, brothers and sisters are going to be there, and aunts and uncles are going to be there, and you're going to eat till you can't eat anymore. And I was going to say you watch football, but that's Thanksgiving, isn't it? Christmas is basketball, I think, but I don't really watch that. But that's neither here nor there. But you're going to gather with the family, you're going to have a great time, you're going to stuff your face, and just think about these missionary families. They're not going to be able to run home to Grandma and Grandpa's, and it's going to be just them. And and part of that's good, part of that's bad. There's a real isolation that happens among these families that immerse themselves in other nations, and they're just there alone, and they're just there serving, and there's a real loneliness, and there's disease, and there's sickness. Things that we just take for granted. I remember one of the first times I took a group of people down into the heart of the Mekong Delta, and we did some work down there, and then we came back to Saigon, and the missionary came and he met me, and he gave me a piece of paper, and it had the word albendazole written on it, and I could tell it was the name of a medicine. And I'm like, "What this?" He said, "You need to go to the pharmacy down the road here, and you need to get everybody a dose of this stuff." And I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Well, you all likely picked up, a parasite that you have living inside of you, and if you don't kill it now, it's going to grow." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, what?" And that's just life for them. They do that every so often. They take medications like that. There's just sickness and disease, and there are just hardships and we need to share with them in that. And a part of this offering lets them know and be remembered that they're not forgotten. I did miss this just a little bit, and this really was something I really wanted to point out, how the Lottie Moon Christmas offering came into being. Lottie Moon, when she wrote back she almost begged for people to come and serve in China. She saw the great need. And the Women's Missionary Society, or whatever it was at that time in the United States, throughout the years they sort of tried to collect money for the work in China, and they would send it over there. Well, when she died, they decided that they were going to collect an offering in the month of December. And they collected this offering, and to send to China and decided that they would do this every year. And another name that all you dyed-in-the-wool Southern Baptists are going to remember is Miss Annie Armstrong, who was a great leader in the women's society in North America, actually is the one who gave the name to the offering to be the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. And so that's how it came to be. So the passage in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9 this morning that I want to look at, they are technically about an offering that's being given. They are about an offering that Paul has been collecting from different churches to take to some poverty relief in Judea among the Christians there. Apparently, this church at Corinth had made a promise to collect this offering, and it's a year later, and they've still sent nothing. And so Paul laid out some principles. Really, it's about giving. Again, this is about collecting a special offering, which is what we're trying to do in the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. But I think that you can take these principles, and I think they apply to giving in general. You know, giving a tithe, giving an offering. They just apply to giving in general. So I'm going to start in 2 Corinthians, and I know it's chapters 8 and 9, but don't worry. I'm not going to go verse by verse. All right, I'm going to do some skipping, so we won't. Don't think it's going to be that long. Verses 2 and 3 of chapter 8. In great trial of affliction and the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches for their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing. I should have started in verse 1. Let me read verse 1. He says, moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia. So he's using these churches at Macedonia as an example to the churches of Corinth about how they were to give. And so then in verse 2 it says, in great trial of affliction and in abundance of their joy and in their deep poverty, they abounded in the riches for their liberality. So the first thing I want to talk about giving is that giving is not to be affected by circumstances. All right, giving is not to be affected by circumstances. It says two things about these churches in Macedonia. First of all, they were under some kind of great trial. There was some kind of great affliction. There was a great persecution that happened to them, that was happening to them at that time. And yet they were able to give out of joy. And the second thing it says to them is that they were a very poor church. It says that they were in deep poverty. And yet they willfully, they joyfully, actually it says that they generously, use the word generous, liberally. They liberally gave out of their deep poverty. Circumstances are really not an excuse for giving or not giving. They really aren't. How you feel in your own life, whether you're suffering your own trials, your poverty or your richness. Can I just tell you this? I'm just going to tell you this. If you don't give a tithe on $1,000, you won't give it on $10,000. I'm just telling you the truth. You think $100 is a lot? Wait till you need to drop $1,000 in there. All right? Look, our circumstances do not dictate whether or not we give. Here's why. It didn't for them. They were still able to give out of joy, even though they were suffering a great persecution. They were still able to give liberally, even though they were a church that was in poverty. Here's the reason. Giving really isn't about the money. Giving really isn't about... Can I just say this? God doesn't need my money. I mean, that's just a fact. God doesn't need my money. He really doesn't need your money. And He really doesn't need our money. Giving is about more than raising money. It's about more than having money to pay a light bill, to pay ministers, to send to missionaries. Giving is really about worship. I want you to know that. Giving is really about worship. And all through the Old Testament, it was about worshiping God. It was about because He is worthy. It's about because we have a love for Him and we want to honor Him and glorify Him in our lives. And giving is an act of sacrifice whereby we lay it at the altar of God. And that sacrifice, we say to God, you are worthy of this sacrifice that we're making. It's not even just about worship, it's all about faith. Because when you give from yours to give to go to someone else, You're saying, I believe that God can take care of me, although I'm willing to just freely give this away. It's an act of faith. It's about worship. It's an act of faith. And all of these are found in the Old Testament through their examples of giving. And the other thing that it was in the Old Testament was, it was an act of remembrance. Giving was me, or the person giving, it was their remembering what God had done in their lives. Maybe how God had delivered them, maybe how God had brought them out of slavery in Egypt, maybe how He had brought them into the promised land. For you and I, giving is a way for us to remember how God changed our life, how God came in and gave us a great salvation. It's about remembering. Next week I'm gonna preach on thanks be to God for the indescribable gift. All right, and it is being thankful to God for the great gift that He has given to us, which is our salvation. You understand your salvation is a gift, right? I mean that you don't deserve it. You still don't deserve it. You never will deserve it. And you haven't done enough good to earn it. And you never will do enough good to earn it. And you can't do enough. You understand that your salvation is just simply a gift that God has given to you. And that's what an offering, and that's what giving is. It is a remembrance of the gift that God gave to us. And so we give also as well. Verses 4 and 5, he says, and they were imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering of the saints. And not only as we hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God. Listen, the first step is that we need to first give our own hearts to the Lord. We need to first give ourselves to the Lord. Again, there's no points for giving. There's no points in heaven for giving to the Lottie Moon offering. All right? There's no points in heaven because you tithe if your heart is separated from God. You understand that? So he says the first thing that they did is that they gave their hearts to the Lord. And the first thing that we do is we need to give our hearts to the Lord. We talked about last week about Christ being the example of servanthood when He washed His disciples' feet. And here in chapter 8, verse 10, it's not verse 10 that I want, and I can't even see. It's verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though He was rich, yet for your sakes He became poor, that you through His poverty might become rich. So here again He's saying Christ is our example. Christ is our example of giving. Christ is our example of giving in a way that benefits someone else. So circumstances don't dictate how we give. Give yourself first to the Lord. And we've got to have this willing heart, this willing mind. Verse 12 says, for if there is first a willing mind, it is accepted according to what one has and not according to what one does not have. Verse might be a little confusing. I'm going to try to explain it in this way. He talks about, and I might interplay the word heart for mind. It's just because that's the way I'm thinking about it. I'm not doing it on purpose. But if I say heart, I mean mind. There first has to be a willing mind. There first has to be a willingness in the heart to give. He says, because if there is this willingness, then it's going to be accepted, not according to what you have and not according to what you do not have. So think of it like this. Think of your heart, your mind, your heart, whatever. Now I've confused myself. Think of your heart and think of your hand. All right? Here's what I want you to understand. That in your giving, God is looking at the heart. Right? We understand that. God looks at the heart. Right? So maybe your hand gives more than your heart really wants to. Well, guess what God's looking at? He's not looking at how much you actually gave. He's looking at what's in your heart and that regret that you have. Your hand gives more than your heart. God is seeing the heart. Maybe your hand can't give as much as what's in your heart. Maybe it's just not possible. Guess what God's looking at? He's looking at the heart. And that's what he's saying here about that willingness in the mind, about being willing in your mind, that it's accepted not according to what one has and not according to what he does not have. God accepts your gift. Look, when we talk about this extra offering, and here's a problem. And I say it's a problem. I've never been here for a Lottie Moon Christmas offering, but I've been in enough Baptist churches in my life and around enough Baptist people that I know that this happens. And if this happens, and if you do this and you're just going to keep doing it. I'm not condemning you, all right? But I just want to share something. There are people, some people who want to give more than anything else are actually on a very limited and very fixed income. But they want to give to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering so bad. And so oftentimes what they'll do is they will take it out of their tithe and they will give it to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. Can I just ask you not to do that? I mean, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong for doing that. Look, I know you are on a limited fixed income. I know that. But here's the thing. God's looking at your heart. God knows you want to give. God knows how much you want to give. And here's the thing. Because we're taking and we're combining it with every other Southern Baptist church in America, you think you're giving so little. But I'm going to tell you what. If everybody only gave a little, it would add up to so much. You say, I can only afford $5. Then just give the $5. I can only afford a couple of dollars. Then just give a couple of dollars. Look, it's not about how much you're giving. It's about the heart that's willing and the heart that desires. And that's what God is looking at. He is looking at that heart. So now down in chapter 9, and we're going to start in verse 6. And it's a principle of sowing and reaping. And he says, but this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Now, I wanted to bring this up because it is a principle. Now, listen, I want you to understand this, though, about sowing and reaping. It is a principle that runs through the entire Bible, and it is not just about money. I want you to understand. Now, we're looking at it in reference to money in this sermon today, because in this passage, it's about money. But I want you to know that this principle that runs through the entire Bible is about more. It's about your entire life. It's not just about money, but we are looking at it today in money. And he says this. He says, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Listen, reaping always follows sowing. All right? Sowing whatever. Money, sowing goodness, sowing giving, sowing grace, sowing forgiveness, whatever. It runs through the Bible. Reaping always follows sowing. You always reap what you sow. You always reap in accordance with what you sow. You always reap later than what you sow. You always reap more than what you sow. Example, one little kernel of corn. Plant that baby in the ground. It grows up. It produces a stalk of corn. The stalk of corn will produce what? 3, 4 ears? How many ears will a stalk of corn produce? It'll produce more than one, right? Okay, can we say 3 just for argument's sake? So one little kernel of corn grows up, produces a stalk of corn. That stalk of corn produces 3 ears. How many kernels of corn are on those ears? Hundreds, right? Hundreds. More than what was sown. Much more than what was sown. Reaped later than what was sown. It's a principle that's in nature. It's a principle that runs all through the world, that runs all through the Bible, and it runs all through our lives. We reap what we sow. We reap it more than what we sowed, and we reap it later than what we sowed. And it just is. Here's another thing about reaping and sowing. You reap in accordance with what you sow, and that's really what he's saying here. In other words, if a farmer went out and just sowed a whole lot of seed, he has a better chance of having a greater and more abundant harvest than someone who just sows a little seed. Let me bring it to who you are. Who put this clock right here? I just saw this. I'm sorry, that squirrel. But I just saw, we're going to take a hammer to this thing later on. I know I've never been accused of being long, so you caught me off guard. By the way, is that the right time? Right? I'm sorry. I just caught me off guard. Is that for you? It's for you. It's for you. Okay, good. No. That was funny. It just caught me totally off guard. Where was I now? We're talking about reaping and sowing. And I was going to bring it home to you. So if you have a 401k and you're one of these people that kind of keeps track of your 401k, this year you probably made 17, 18% this year. Does anybody know if I'm right or if I'm wrong? Pretty close, right? Your 401k, you probably, now see, so you made 17 or 18%. Just think if you'd put more money in there. You see what I'm saying? If you had had more money in there, you would have made more money, right? Principle of sowing and reaping. The more you put in, the more you invest, the more of that increase, the bigger that increase gets. By the way, I want to tell you that the market this year was up way more than 17%. That's just neither here nor there, but I'm just going to throw that out at you. If you made 17 or 18%, your money manager didn't even keep up with the market, and I'm just going to throw that out. Anyhow, so the more you sow, the greater you sow, you put yourself in a position to reap a greater harvest, even in your home life, in your own life. And I do want to say this: the reaping that we reap as God's people, I don't think it's always money. All right. In other words, I'm never going to tell you if you sow $1,000, you're going to reap $1,200. You're never going to hear that come out of my mouth. In fact, the blessings that we reap from our sowing, even from our sowing of giving, are oftentimes blessings that are actually in our lives more important than money. I've been at that place before, and so just so you won't have to feel embarrassed, I've spent decades giving at least a minimum of 10% to the Lord and giving different offerings along the way. And I've had those days where I've been like, all right, God, where is it? Right? Where's my reaping? I've been faithful to you for decades. Now, I'm in a hard spot here, so if you've ever talked to God like that, don't feel bad because I have to. But then he reminds me of things like this. Your kids really never got in trouble when they were growing up. That's kind of a blessing, right? That's kind of a blessing that you can't put money on. He said, your wife didn't just pack up and walk out on you when she probably should have and probably could have. Hey, that's a blessing, right? I mean, that's a blessing that I can't even put a price on. You've had a good family. You've had a good life. You've been in churches that have loved you and they've treated you well and they've treated your family well. You can't even put a price on that. It may be that God gives you a job that you love. There are some people who would trade their salary for a job that they actually love and for working for a people that they can actually get along with. So I just want you to know that sometimes the blessings that we reap due to our sowing, it's not just you sow money, you're going to reap money. All right? It's not exactly that. But we do reap the blessings of God in our lives. And I believe that many of those blessings come as a result of our giving. And the last one here, it's about purposing and giving. So verse 7 says, so let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, because God loves a cheerful giver. Look, really, and I always say, whenever I'm talking about the offering, I always say, ask the Lord what he would have you to do. You know what? I really mean that. Because it really is an extra offering. And so I really do mean for you to ask the Lord what he would put on your heart for you to give. That way you can purpose it in your heart. That way you can know in your heart, this is how much I'm supposed to give to Lottie Moon. And then don't do it grudgingly. Again, there's no points for giving the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. There's no points for giving the tithe. There's a principle at work, but there's no points at work. And if you're going to begrudge it, and if it's you're just going to be sour and bitter about it, you know what? Just keep it. I'm serious. If you're going to begrudge it and be sour and bitter about it, just keep it. Now you're going to reap the consequences of that, but that's okay. Just keep it. Again, God doesn't need our money. He doesn't need it. He just doesn't need it. It is our privilege, and it is our act of worship that we give it. So purpose in your heart what it is to give. Don't do it grudgingly or of necessity, because God loves a cheerful giver. We want to give it cheerfully, we want to give it liberally, and we want to give it because it's in our heart to give it as we seek and we follow the Lord. And if you read that next passage, it's just a reminder that God is able to make all grace abound toward you, so that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance in every good work. And it's just saying this: you can't outgive God. You can't give to God more than He can give back to you in all of the different ways that influence our lives. So here's what I would like. Go ahead and stand up with me. This is basically the end of the sermon at 11:32 because I have a clock. I have preached to you a sermon about giving, and specifically about giving to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. So actually, in response to that, I would expect that you would desire to give to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. Now, I didn't plan ahead well enough with Debbie to take the offering later, but there should be an envelope in the pew there in front of you. I think it says "Tell Me the Story" on it, maybe is what it says. And it probably says Lottie Moon Christmas offering. If I'm right, would somebody hold one up? And even if I'm wrong, would you hold it up? Yeah. So it says "Tell Me the Story," right? So it says "Tell Me the Story" on it. If God has impressed upon you. Now, if you need to pray about it a week or two, I want you to do that. If you need to give your heart to God first, I want you to do that. So don't feel pressured to give today. But when you preach a sermon, you expect people to respond to what you talked about. And since we talked about giving this offering, the expectation is that there would be a response. And if God has already impressed upon your heart for you to give, and you need to give today, what we have is, I noticed that some of the men, one brought a plate up over here, one brought a plate up over here, and there's going to be plates out in the foyer. If you want to just drop it in the plate on your way out, please feel free to do that. If you want to wait and give it next week, that's more than okay. Even the next week, that's more than okay. It's fine. But I do want you to know that there is an opportunity for you to give. You know what? Maybe, I didn't really focus on this, but maybe in the course of talking about Miss Lottie Moon, you know, you're feeling something in your life about God calling you to some bigger service and to some greater ministry. And I can tell you that over the years ahead, I fully expect that people from our congregation will surrender their lives to the ministry in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And maybe today you've been touched in that way, and you'd like me to begin to pray with you as you seek the Lord about it. Maybe you need to surrender your life to Christ today for the first time and have that life-changing experience. I don't know. But if you need to come forward for any reason this morning, you come right now while we sing.